Hello, welcome back everyone. Today's lesson is on 11-2, domain and range. So we're going to be talking about what domain is, what range is, and how they tie into each other. So if we're looking here, first we're going to be talking about domain of a function. This is going to be the set of all input values. Input values. The domain, otherwise, again, our input. Okay, domain is our input values, but also we can just talk about our x values, because x's are what we're going to be manipulating, we're going to be plugging into functions to figure out what our range is, and that's the connection. The range of a function is the set of all. If it's not the input, it's going to be the output. Okay, so domain is the input, range is the output. To get to the range, we must use the domain. So these are our x values that coordinate with a y value. If you look at any ordered pair, we have an x and we have a y. This is our input and this is our output. So therefore, whatever x is, y corresponds to x. And we'll talk about dependent and independent variables as well later on in the course. But for right now, we're just going to talk about the domain and range. Range is, again, just the output. And if it's not the x, it's the y. So to sort of illustrate this, I want to open up just another picture that you're all familiar with. Okay, let's say that at lunch you're in the cafeteria and you see the vending machine. This vending machine is just calling out to you. It says, "Drink me, drink me." So if we're looking at this vending machine, obviously what we want to do is we want to put in $1 or $2 or $3, however expensive soda is now. And then what we do is we press one of these different buttons to give us the soda that we want. So say if we push this button of Coca-Cola. This Coca-Cola button would then tell the machine to output a Coca-Cola. Okay? So we input this command of this button and therefore we get Coca-Cola. If we would press this button of Coke Zero, okay, we press the button, the machine is working, and output becomes Coke Zero. Okay? And likewise, when you press Diet Coke, output Diet Coke. Sprite, output Sprite. Okay? As you can see, every time we press one button, it corresponds to a different output. So this is sort of what we want to sort of get in mind is when we input a value, we get another value as our output. So the domain in this case would be these buttons for these different drinks, and then the output would be the drink itself. So the command actually works as a function. Okay, now let's see what it looks like when we actually apply it. So when we're given examples or we're given problems where we have to find the domain and range, remember, just as we said before, domain is our input, okay, and range is our output. So in and out, they correspond to one another. Also remember that domain is x and range is y. When finding the domain of a set of points, remember this is a set because of these closed brackets here. Okay, when we're looking at this, we're looking at the first value first. And what are those values? Correct, those values are the x's. If you look at any ordered pair, we have x and then y. Okay, so all of our domain, all we do is we list them out, 1, 3, 5, and 7. But remember, we do need to have it in set notation. So do the squiggle brackets to enclose this to make it a set. So we have a set, or this domain, of 1, 3, 5, and 7. They are corresponding with just our x values from our points above. Likewise, we're looking at 2, 4, 6, and 8. Our second part of our ordered pair is y, so therefore we're going to just write the range as 2, 4, 6, and 8. Again, writing it as a set in this set notation. Okay, and that's it. This is our domain, or our x values. Okay, range is y. One way that I can remember domain and range that I remember that keeps it on track for me is because sometimes we get confused if x is domain or y is domain. So if you look at this, D comes before R in the alphabet, right? Okay, and also look at x. X comes before y. So therefore domain corresponds to x, R corresponds to y, or range. Okay, so that's one way to just keep it separated. Okay, so if we're looking at the second problem, I'm going to let you do this on your own for a second. Okay, what we're really looking for is our domain. Remember, those are our x values, and then we're looking at our range. Okay, so if we're looking at our domain here, remember domain is our x values. So -4 is our first x value, so I'm just going to put -4 down here in our closed brackets. -3 is our next one. And we have 0, 1, and 2. Okay, this is written in set notation. Once again, this is the domain or just the x values. Okay, the range, again, the y values is nothing but 8, 6, 0, -2, -4. Quick question. If one of these y values were repeated, is that okay within a function? Absolutely. Remember that range can correspond to many different points. But remember that domain, only one point can be with one value on the other side. So therefore, we cannot repeat our x values and get different results. Remember, just like that Coke machine, how mad would you be if you pressed the Sprite button and you got a Diet Coke? Exactly the same thing. So if it's a true function, it only corresponds to one output or maps to one output. So just in sort of conclusion of this section, domain and range of a graph. This is what we're going to be getting into next. But just remember that domain is the input or all possible x values. And lastly, range is the output or all possible y values. Okay, and just as a recap to this brief lesson on domain and range, remember, domain is nothing but our x values, or we can also talk about our inputs, our in. Okay, with every input, we must have an output, which is going to be our range, or our y values. So we have an in and an out. Okay, they correspond to one another. You must have an input for every output. Okay, and then if we're looking at our last point, again, this is just applying it to our set of points here. We have a -2, a 4, and an 8. Remember, those x values are the only thing in the domain. So we have -2, 4, and 8 as our set of our domain. Okay, and lastly, we're looking at our range, which is 3, 6, and 9, because every ordered pair is x, comma, y. So therefore, our range in this case, again, is 3, 6, 9. And that concludes today's lesson. Stay tuned for part 2 of domain and range, where we start analyzing different functions and looking at how we can find the domain and range of a graph.